European edition back in your ears, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. It's me, Matt Davis-Adams, joined in the studio by Alvaro Romeo.
Hello.
Hola.
Hola. What?
Seb Staff applause with us too. How are you doing, Seb?
Doing good. Matt Davis-Adams.
Excellent. And on the big screen, the incomparable Julien Laurent. Jules, you okay?
Bonjour. Very good, thank you. And you?
Oui, très bien. Très bien. Later, we shall hear from James Horncastle on all things Italian. But let's get some moments of the weekend, first of all. Sebs, you can kick us off.
Marco Reus. So, obviously, just before the weekend, Reus announced he's going to be leaving the club. And, big 5-1 victory of Augsburg. Very nice way to warm up for the second leg of that Champions League game. But there's a lovely shot of Reus with the yellow wall before the game. But also, he scored in the second half, and he kind of... after he'd raced away to score really elegantly, the camera caught all sorts of Dortmund dignitaries in the crowd. So Carsten Kramer was there, Aki Watzke, Lars Ricken, who's taking over as the kind of sports CEO. Matthias Sammer wearing a lumberjack shirt. Feel like that needs a little bit more context. But you could see how much the moment meant to all of them and how much they enjoyed watching someone who's done so much for Dortmund and been so unlucky, but have a really, really lovely swan song. Moment of the week.
Mean to call him a nearly man? I guess he might not be if he wins the Champions League this season.
I suppose so, but I think it misses a sort of a broader point, Matt, about how many bad injuries he's had at terrible moments and how good a player he really has been for a very, very long time. And that kind of transcends players who've left the club, difficult circumstances, managerial change in eras. And I suppose one of the constants has been Reus, and he's been a wonderful servant.
Jules, I'm guessing your moment of this week, you're hoping is going to come on Tuesday. What about from the weekend?
Very much so for Tuesday. This Friday night in Troyes, where in the second division in Ligue 2, the game between Troyes and Valenciennes was abandoned just before the end, only with a few minutes to play. When the score was 1-1, Valenciennes are already relegated. Troyes fighting against another relegation, which would be the second in a row after they went down from Ligue 1 to the second division last summer. And the ultras threw flares on the pitch and staged a big protest. Some of the players threw the flares back, which is obviously not the right thing to do either. And overall, just the situation and the crisis at Troyes, which is a club owned obviously by the City Football Group and Manchester City. And when it works well for Girona, it's a disaster for Troyes when they made wrong decisions time and time again. And really, overall, it's a sad state of affairs for Troyes and a really difficult situation. They can still stay up, but they will need a miracle. And also, we don't know what's going to happen with this game now and what the discipline committee of the French Federation would decide. So, not good at all in Troyes on Friday night.
Girona, very much the outlier in terms of multi-club ownership model. Alvaro, what's yours, please?
Well, it could have been Girona because they qualified for the Champions League for the first time in their history this weekend. But I'm going to stay with Celta. We haven't spoken about them a lot this season because they've been pretty bad. But at the same time, there was a real danger of them going to the second division. And I don't think that's going to happen because they beat Villarreal this weekend, 3-2. And it was a very relieving victory for them. They got the points they needed with the manager Giraldez, who was the one who succeeded Rafa Benitez, and being 8 points away from relegation with 12 points remaining tells me that Celta are going to stay in La Liga for one more season. It was difficult for them. It was kind of epic because Anastasios Douvikas scored the goal on the 82nd minute of the game, and they did it. And I think that after enduring a very difficult season, Celta knows that they will most probably stay in La Liga for one more year.
All right, more La Liga to come later. Next today, we're going to get to those Champions League semi-finals, second legs. Bayern in the Bernabeu rolls beautifully off the tongue. This tie perfectly poised after last week's first leg in Munich, where it finished 2-2. Alvaro, Real Madrid wrapped up the league at the weekend, so the celebrations, I guess, somewhat muted here. They've done it so easily, though. They've still got plenty in the tank for the Champions League, you see.
I think that they've got a lot. I mean, La Liga for them has been a little bit of a stroll in the park, and really, they've been better than Girona, have beaten them twice comfortably, and Girona is the second of La Liga right now. They also beat Barcelona twice, and they have been imposing their game every time. I think that the fact that they have only suffered one defeat tells the story, really. Real Madrid has been really good defensively as well when it mattered, especially in the domestic competition, not so much in the Champions League, but they are reaching this game in the perfect moment for them. I mean, they haven't celebrated La Liga. They will do it next Saturday, going to Cibeles, most likely, which is the place where they go to celebrate the titles. But, this is the most important game they've got left until the beginning of June. And they are in a very, let's put it this way, favorable position right now. Bayern is going to be difficult, a tough opponent, but Real Madrid are where they want to be. And probably Bayern right now too, in the Champions League. The difference is that Real Madrid has won already 2 trophies, the Super Cup and La Liga. Bayern is still empty-handed.
And given Thibaut Courtois came back in that weekend win over Cadiz, is it likely that he starts this game, or are they going to stick with Lunin?
I really don't think so. I think that Ancelotti is going to stick to Lunin because Lunin has been having a decent season. Thibaut Courtois did a couple of really good saves in the game, by the way. So that maybe give us a hint that he may be a contender to be in a hypothetical Champions League final in June, starting in that game. But not this time. I am a little bit more curious about who is going to pair up with Rudiger as centre-back, because there are many options. Militao is back. He played 90 minutes the other day against Cadiz. I don't think that the Brazilian is going to be the first choice option for Ancelotti. And then you can use either Nacho, who is leaving to the MLS at the end of the season, a great servant of the club, or Tchouaméni, who is so flexible in a way that he can play as a holding midfielder or as a centre-back, as he did against Bayern in the same game. So for me, this is the biggest doubt. And also, if Bayern or Real Madrid who will dominate here? Because we have seen it lately in the Champions League that Real Madrid is more than happy to be slightly dominated and then kill you on the break.
What do you think, Jules? Real Madrid at home this season, yet to be beaten. They're heavy favourites here. It's heavy, maybe a little too strong.
Yeah, maybe a little bit too strong. They have to be favourite because it's 0-0 now. There's no away goals anyway. But at the Bernabeu with the fans, the sort of mystic side of their Champions League every season as well, and that aura that they have, I think it'd be very hard. I think Bayern can do it, but we saw again Tuchel not rotating maybe as much that Carlo did or that Terzic did, and PSG didn't even play. And then in result of that, lost Guerrero. I mean, Dyer was not fit before the game, but he played. So there was a lot of things I didn't really get from the Tuchel's starting 11 against Stuttgart at the weekend in a game that meant nothing to them at all. So we will have to see. I just think that it's hard to see Bayern really going there and beating this incredible Real Madrid side this season.
Seb, it feels like we've got Thomas Tuchel in the Bundesliga and Thomas Tuchel in the Champions League, and they're quite separate.
I would actually extend it out, Matt. Like I think there are so many different players at Bayern who have alter egos between domestic and continental football. And it's as if, in Europe, it's as if everybody expects them to get beaten. Everybody expected Arsenal to go to eliminate them in the last round. We're talking quite rightly about Real Madrid's strengths and how they're a prohibitive favourite in this game. And there's something, you see a very uninhibited Bayern, I think, in the Champions League. And yeah, I don't think it is so much about Thomas Tuchel, because I would actually probably compare it to not a straight parallel, but perhaps Di Matteo's Chelsea, where you have this core of really influential, really talented players who are playing amidst a whole nest of flaws and issues, and yet are overcoming them in one-off games, which, as we know, can always happen and don't probably examine you in the same way that a 38-game season does back in Germany. One thing, poor Eric Dyer against Stuttgart, because in the first half, goes up for a header at corner, gets a pretty nasty head injury, starts bleeding, then makes an absolutely brilliant goal line clearance, but with the part of his head that's been injured at the set piece, bleeds profusely, has to be substituted off. And I know people love this, but without Dyer, there are huge problems in that defence. He was brought to Bayern not necessarily because of his technical abilities, but because, yes, he can pass, but he's a great communicator, great professional. And so he's the stable point amongst a group of defenders who actually are very proactive, very frenetic is probably the right word, very very talented, but probably not quite right as a sort of as a group. Without him, I would really fear for them in the Bernabeu. But yeah, we'll see. I think Tuchel did a pretty good job of showing around some of the minutes. Sané only played a part of the game. We talked about Guerrero having to come off, which was unfortunate, and Goretzka having to play more than he might do. Musiala was rested, which is super important. Connie Lima was rested, and Lima's probably been not discovery, because he was hardly unknown, but certainly the man of the last probably 3 Champions League games. He's been absolutely brilliant in central midfield. So interesting.
One thing I like about Tuchel the other day against Real Madrid is the fact that maybe he's on his way out, but he doesn't mind making key decisions during the game. He dropped Goretzka for the second half, brought in Guerreiro, swapped Sané and Musiala, and Sané ended up scoring on the left,
Brilliant
just
goal.
dribbling past Ferland Mendy. Beautiful goal. He has made some key decisions in this tie already. I think that he's not the kind of manager who, since he knows that he's leaving, he says, you know what, I don't care. He's still trying to have an influence on the games.
Alvaro, I think that's a really good point, because also it feels like he's been freed from the commentary of the German media. So previously, every little micro decision relating to the team, every substitution, team selection, where's Kimmich playing, why isn't Goretzka starting, it comes with an op-ed piece somewhere from someone who has loyalties to someone else in the club. Now it's like, I'm leaving. Say what you want. It doesn't matter. You know, we're doing very well. The performances in Europe are speaking for themselves. Kimmich will play what I want him to play. Goretzka will sit on the bench if I want him to. Lima's going to start because he's important. He feels like he's got a little bit more agency than he might have done previously.
He's dropping a torch behind him and leaving like the Joker, something like that. Yeah. He doesn't care.
Obligatory Harry Kane reference, his last chance of silverware this season. I think I'm more concerned than anybody else about him ending his career without a trophy. I wonder, though, if actually Bayern win the Bundesliga next season, which is clearly not a given, that's a bit more credible than just moving to Germany to go to Bayern because they always win the Bundesliga. If you do it after you've not won it for a year, maybe it looks a bit better in retrospect.
Yeah, and I think if you look at Kane's season objectively and fairly, he's actually played extremely well. Even against Stuttgart, where Jules talked about how rotten they were in Stuttgart, and he's absolutely right. Kane played really well at different points, played a lovely through ball with Eric Choupo-Moting in the first half, which Choupo-Moting didn't take advantage of. But I think when you look at Kane's contribution to a team that isn't very joined up, doesn't make a lot of sense, isn't particularly cohesive, and it's been chopped and changed, and you see the kind of the steady beat of his influence, that's an amazingly impressive accomplishment when you marry it with new culture, new country, new language, new teammates, new coach, all of these things. He's just dropped in and produced kind of a world-class performance across the season, which is an amazing thing. And I don't know, the trophy thing is tricky because even next season, Matt, if he wins the Bundesliga, the assessment will just be, wow, it's Bayern, isn't it? It's easy. Even though Leverkusen have kind of proven that that's not always the case.
Finally on Bayern, what if he wins it as player-manager? Because they're running out of other options, right? You've written about this.
A real throwback, yeah, for player manager. The options are pretty varied. So we obviously did a report in The Athletic about this over the weekend, and they're still at shortlist stage. I don't think there's anything particularly close at the moment, but they've had that succession of issues, which I have a little bit of sympathy for, because I know it's easy to mock them and say, well, Bayern can't attract anybody, but so much has changed. If you look at the technical department and the new dimensions that Ebel and Christoph Freund have brought in, it's not yet clear where, firstly, their authority ends and goes up to, and what the role is of, for instance, Uli Hoeneß and Karl-Heinz Rummenigge. Well, what role are they playing? And so if you're a coach coming in there, you have to contend with Bayern, who are in need of a rebuild, so you're not operating from a position of strength. Bavarian media, not very forgiving of lack of success, but also this very nebulous structure, which is still to kind of show itself. And that's quite difficult. I mean, Bayern Munich are a very big club, but it's also quite difficult to attract a truly elite coach under those circumstances where you're not guaranteed to succeed because, damages your reputation. So we'll see. But pending. Let's see where we are in a week, I guess, after the Champions League semi-final.
So all those reasons then, Jules, that Seb's just given, is that why Zinedine Zidane has decided that Bayern is not the next job for him?
Yeah, and I'm not really sure. I think he was at some point on their list, but never really in that concrete way. I think the language is a big thing, really, and you have to be honest. For him especially, and the way he connects with his players is key, and he was never going to learn German. He doesn't speak another language than Spanish and French anyway. So, and Italian, a little bit of Italian. So it reduces the way he can go, really. But I think he liked the idea of Bayern, but Adidas were the ones who loved this idea more than anybody else, more than Zidane himself and more than Bayern themselves. So it was never really, I think, that discussion.
All right, well, that seems to sum up modern football quite nicely. So that is on Wednesday, 24 hours prior to Real Madrid versus Bayern Munich. Jules will have bitten his fingernails down to the bone as his beloved
I've already started.
PSG welcome Borussia Dortmund. They're looking to defend or maybe even improve on their 1-0 first leg advantage. Still very much in it, obviously, Jules, but are they still lamenting their failure to score last week? Because that was pretty incredible that they didn't manage to.
Yeah, you're right. I felt being there, especially with that incredible atmosphere. It was my first time, Seb, by the way, and I just loved every second of it, even if they beat my team. That it could have finished easily a 2-2 draw, for example. Dortmund probably deserved another one, to be fair, because they played well when they had the chances. And PSG somehow in that second half, I just don't understand how at least one didn't go in. So they seem to move on quite quickly from that game. The players, Luis Enrique, the people at the club, certainly the people that I know well, which is maybe not a bad thing because they seem really up for it and confident. Let's not hope too confident, but a bit like after the Barcelona first leg, for example, going into Spain, and this time it's at home. I think the atmosphere is going to be incredible. I like this Dortmund team. I like them in the Champions League more than in the Bundesliga, but I like Edin Terzic. I think there's a really good manager in there, even if in the league between this season and last season, it's been a bit of a nightmare for him. But overall, I like what he does. I like some of the decisions. I like some of the calls that he makes. I don't know if we will see a back three again on Tuesday night, like we saw in the first game in Paris when they faced each other in the group stage. That's the only time he played the back three, and at the time it didn't really work out. But I would not rule out Terzic coming up with an idea to be able to make this team as I was going to say comfortable, but that's the wrong word, as kind of bearable for his team, because it's going to be hell. I think the atmosphere is going to be amazing. This PSG team is going to go at them again and again and again, and you will need a very strong Dortmund team to come out of that and be able to qualify. So I think they can do it, of course, and PSG can easily win 2-0, 3-1 and qualify too. That's why I think this game is also fascinating, like Wednesday night. But I'm really curious to see what Dortmund do to try to not invite too much pressure on themselves.
I really like Paris this season in general. Only thing is that sometimes during games they get broken in two pieces. It happened last season a lot with Neymar, Messi and Kylian playing up front. But this season, the fact that Ugarte is not playing as a holding midfielder means that they control the game many times, but the opponent has every now and then 3 or 4 really dangerous counterattacks with Vitinha, Emery and Fabian, who are dynamic, but none of them are particularly defensive-minded. I think that is one of the chances of Dortmund, in my opinion. And the other one, and I want to ask Jules, if Mbappe plays as a number 9, he's a totally different player. He's hidden between the centre-backs and he cannot do much. I don't understand why the other day against Dortmund, Kylian played as a number 9 for a good period of time instead of Kolo Muani. That was a decision that I never understood very well.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted to put... they didn't want Kylian on the left-hand side because of Riasson and Sancho, and they wanted someone who would run a bit more defensively and defend a bit more, which Mbappe doesn't do. So I think that's why Kolo Muani came on and played on the left. That's why Gonzalo Ramos didn't come on at all, which was a bit surprising, really, because Ramos was in much better form than Kolo Muani, but you can't put Ramos on that left-hand side, whereas I guess you can with Kolo Muani. I don't know. I don't know if you move to a 4-2-4 from a PSG point of view and Luis Enrique straight away. So like at the start of the game on Tuesday night to really go for it. So you take out Ruiz or Zaire Emery and you leave with Vitinha and you go really, really like full attack. But then you expose yourself to a Sancho counter-attack and a Adeyemi counter-attack, or Daniel Malen is back now as well, and those kind of moves. Or if you keep the 4-3-3 and you wait maybe a little bit more in the game to see what happens, to move to a 4-2-4 if really you need to. I don't know. I think we will have the same team apart from Lucas Hernandez, who's obviously did his ACL in the first leg and will be replaced by Danilo, surely.
Well, it'll be the first Champions League semi-final at the Parc des Princes with fans in attendance since 1995. Seb, Dortmund warmed up for it nicely with a 5-1 thrashing of Augsburg on Saturday. They coming into this game thinking that they're going to have to score again if they're to get through to the final, and kind of lamenting the fact that they didn't do that last week, I guess.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of that. I mean, I think what came out of the first leg was great performance, a real throwback effort, but needed that second goal. I think also I worry about Dortmund because so much of their performance in the first leg depended on really, really exceptional individual performances. So I'm looking at the team from that game now, and I would say Ian Maatsen and Julian Ralston on the outside fullback positions were brilliant. Jadon Sancho we've talked about. Karim Adeyemi gave probably, I would say, certainly his best defensive performance I think I've seen from him at Dortmund. His ability to kind of nullify the Hakimi threat was a huge part of what Dortmund did well, and also protecting Maatsen, enabling him to kind of to make a little bit of bit of hay in the inverted fullback role. Can they do that again? Emre Can was excellent. Niklas Füllkrug scored probably the goal of his career, I would say, certainly in terms of importance. And you're also depending on Hummels and Schlotterbeck in the two centre-back positions who have had really exceptional games, but tend to be spread apart a little bit. And so to ask them to go and reproduce the same calibre of performance 8 days later, it seems an awful stretch. And yet that seems like what it will take, just because we talked about how many chances PSG were able to create, even against a really good PSG Dortmund performance. And it felt like, on a different night, might not go so well. So we'll see. And I also, one of the great intangibles, when you take the Westfalenstadion away from Dortmund, what happens next? And also in that atmosphere in Paris as well, it's a little bit of a blowtorch effect on what is quite a weak side generally.
All right, I think we're going to get the same answer from all three, but starting with you, Seb, who's the Champions League final at Wembley going to be contested between?
I would say, against my heart, I would say PSG Madrid.
Same for you, Alvaro?
So boring. PSG Madrid, yes. Yeah. I say the same thing, yeah.
Jules, you'll be going Dortmund versus somebody.
Yeah, of
Go
course,
the
Dortmund
emotional
Bayern
head,
Munich.
Jules. Go
Here
the
we go.
emotional
Yes.
But yeah, 3 from 3, right, Jules? PSG, Real Madrid.
I have to say PSG, and I think Real Madrid will be too strong.
All right, we'll find out. Okay, let's take a little break and then we'll sound the Horncastle. James Horncastle joins us now from his sun-drenched holiday. James, title race over in Italy, as it is almost everywhere else. But what did the weekend have to offer in Serie A?
I'd say that the most significant result of the weekend was in Reggio Emilia, where Sassuolo beat the champions, Inter. It was only Inter's second defeat in the league all season. The other one was also against Sassuolo, this is quite a head-scratcher, really, because Sassuolo have been a bogey team for the top sides. Last year they beat all of them. But this year, for the first time in 11 years, it looks like their time in Serie A is up. They hired one of the great escape artists, Davide Balladini, to come in and pull them out of the relegation mire. But last week they lost 5-1 to Fiorentina and they just looked dead and buried. So they got this win against an Inter side that has essentially had two title celebrations, because the first one came in the Derby della Madonnina, which they won. They beat AC Milan and they became champions in that fixture. And then last weekend, they also had a formal bus parade through the city of Milan into Piazza del Duomo. Some incredible celebrations there. So Inter a little bit hungover, to say the least. And I think that's what people should focus on, rather than these deep state conspiracy theorizing that's been going on Serie A Twitter about Inter's chief executive and Sassuolo's chief executive, being best men at each other's weddings, going into business together in the past and all this sort of thing. Sassuolo need a win and all that. I think this was just a case of one team having nothing to play for and the other team having everything to play for, and getting a win that keeps their survival hopes narrowly alive.
In terms of Inter's neighbours, Milan, we were hearing last week about how the fans had effectively put the kibosh on the club's move to make Julien Lopetegui their new manager. What's the latest on the Rossoneri?
They've once again been the focus of a lot of attention in Italy this weekend. First and foremost because the Curva, where the ultras stand, they've gone on strike. They basically withdrew all of their flags and banners in protest at the management of the club. They announced that they were going to do this earlier in the week. They basically have said that they're not convinced by the project that the club has. They think it's not been explained well enough. It's ambiguous. A lot of this comes out of what they believe to have been a mediocre season, because even though Milan are second, they've never been in the title race. Inter have beaten them 6 consecutive times, the most recent one being in a derby which allowed Inter to win the league. That was a real slap in the face for the fan base. Milan also obviously went out in the quarterfinals of the Europa League at the hands of another domestic opponent. So last year, Inter knocked them out of the Champions League in the semi-finals. This year, Roma knocked them out in the quarterfinals. So that was disappointing too. And they haven't been impressed by the names of some of the candidates to replace Stefano Pioli in the summer. We wrote about this last week with Lopetegui. Lopetegui has essentially got no chance of getting the Milan job now on the back of that backlash. We've moved on to Sergio Conceição as being the hot name on Gazzetta dello Sport's front pages this week. At the moment, I wouldn't read too much into this. I think the competitive landscape in the executive search for a coach has changed quite significantly in the last 10 days, because Milan were competing, for example, in theory against Liverpool, against Barcelona, against Bayern Munich, and others for coaches. Now, Liverpool have got this process underway to appoint Arne Slot. Barca have announced that Xavi is staying. Bayern were in talks with Ralf Rangnick. That's obviously fallen through, but it means that Milan no longer have to rush to get a coach. They can take their time. They can do more due diligence. So I'm not expecting a quick announcement on that. But it's going to be an announcement that has to set the tone and bring the fans back on side. Now, in terms of their current manager, Stefano Pioli, he was asked in his pre-match press conference a cryptic question, which was, Stefano, do you like pizza? Which in abstract, without context, people are like, what the hell is going on here? But of course, Naples is where people really like pizza. It's where pizza essentially comes from, the best pizza in the world. And there's been a lot of talk about Stefano Pioli becoming the next Napoli manager. He handled that question quite well. He said he prefers capelletti in brodo, which is the local dish from his hometown in Parma. Parma, who've been promoted in the last week back to Serie A. So Pioli, one of the names in the hat for the Napoli job, along with Gasperini and Vincenzo Italiano.
And that brings us very nicely to the Italian sides in European action this week, with Italiano's Fiorentina defending a 3-2 lead in the Conference League on Thursday as they travel to Belgium to face Club Bruges.
Quite an epic and dramatic game at the Artemio Franchi, as Bruges were down to 10 men and yet got the game back to 2-2, and Fiorentina only clinched the win in stoppage time. Fiorentina, even though they scored 3 goals in that game, the story of their season has been they are a team that creates an awful lot, but they are also a team that doesn't convert, and they lost against Hellas Verona this weekend. Verona doing one of the most underrated seasons, I think, at least their manager Baroni, because this is a club that has had to sell off the family silver over this season. Did so in January, completely overhauled the team. You had the Guardia di Finanza, Italy's financial police, basically seizing the company that owns the majority of shares in Hellas Verona as well. And ordinarily, a club would spiral in those circumstances, and instead, they've had a very good second half of the season. But I digress. So back to the European semi-finals. Roma go to Leverkusen looking for a remontada of the sort that we saw in 2018 when they overcame Barcelona after losing 2-0 at the Camp Nou. They won 3-0 at the Stadio Olimpico, Manolas, Peter Drury, and all that, the Greek god in Rome. This is different, obviously, because they're not playing at home. The second leg, they're playing away. And they are going away to a team that is still undefeated in 48 games in Bayer Leverkusen. So to score 2 or 3 goals on them without reply would be a quite incredible achievement. De Rossi saying that he believes, even though Paulo Dybala went off injured in the 1-1 draw with Juventus on Sunday night. Roma have only won one of their last 5 games, which was that short 20-minute game against Udinese, which Brian Cristante won at the death. Roma certainly were outplayed in parts against Leverkusen on last Thursday, particularly shortly after conceding the goal, which Rick Karsdorp gifted to them. But they did have chances themselves. Brian Cristante glancing header from a corner kick, the sort that he scored to win the game against Udinese. You had Azmoun 1v1 as well. You had Tammy Abraham right at the death, missing a sitter, as he did against Juventus in stoppage time on Sunday. And then you've got Atalanta, who are in a better position after their 1-1 draw in Marseille. Marseille had beaten the likes of Ajax, Benfica on penalties, Villarreal at the Velodrome. So to come away with a point from that game gave Gasperini huge satisfaction, particularly after they lost Kolasinac early in that game. They didn't have Hien, another centre-back to bring on, so Darun had to play centre-back, which when they were adjusting their defence and their midfield, it meant that they lost a little bit of balance, which could have led the game to get away from them. But Scamacca continues to be in fine form. He's been the real difference-making in knockout games. I think he's scored in his last 5 or 6 knockout games. So they'll be looking to him. Obviously, they lost their last European game in Bergamo against Liverpool, but they won that game they won that tie 3-1 on aggregate. So Atalanta looking to reach another final. They feel that they're in pole position. So let's see if they can reach the Europa League final in Dublin.
Europa League semi-finals also this week. Atalanta on the verge of their first ever European final. They could get into the Champions League if they win that. First, they've got to overcome Marseille. It's 1-1 after the first leg in France. Jules, what sort of form do we find Marseille in ahead of this one? Not very good form, I would suggest, after a cursory look at their recent results.
Yeah, but I guess the only thing that matters is that first leg, because they didn't play this weekend. They were given the weekend off by the league, like PSG, like we saw before the quarterfinals, second leg as well. And I thought they did really well in that first leg, considering the form that Atalanta are in right now. For Marseille to almost match their intensity, to actually, I think, be the better side. Okay, it was at the Velodrome, so all the fans were there, the 60,000 fans gave an amazing support. But Marseille really were unlucky not to score another goal and not to win that game. So if they can go and reproduce that kind of intensity, certainly in a different atmosphere, of course, away from home, but they can reproduce at least that intensity, I think they'll have a chance. And they really believe in it. They've been better in Europe than they've been in the league. Certainly once Joe Biden's honeymoon happened and he won his first few games, and after that it became more complicated and more difficult against better teams. But in Europe, you can rely on them, really, even if there's there and there the odd moments or a poor performance for some, for the first half against Benfica, for example. But overall, they've had that kind of mentality, the spirit that Aubameyang kind of epitomizes a lot, which is, this is his competition. He's the top goal scorer in Europa League history. He's that good. On those nights, you expect him to deliver. So I expect a really good performance from Marseille on Thursday.
We mentioned Aubameyang. Last season he played for Chelsea, and we don't have any memory of him playing for Chelsea, really, because he didn't do much. Scamacca played for West Ham United as well, and his season was kind of a flop as well, which made me think Lukaku, he's at Roma right now scoring many goals, which makes me think that it's not easy to succeed in the Premier League, but the fact that you don't succeed in the Premier League doesn't make you a worse player at all. The Premier League is a very particular context right now. It's a high-speed football, a lot of high pressing, sometimes man marking as well. And maybe the Premier League football is not for everybody, but that doesn't make you a worse player. Look at Scamacca, Aubameyang, Lukaku, and Mkhitaryan at Inter Milan, players who are capable of beating English side with some other countries' teams. And I think that this is very important to say as well. The football that is being played in England right now doesn't suit anybody, but you are not a worse player for that reason.
It feels like people are catching up to that a little bit, Alvaro, in the sense that it feels like the Premier League is an environment where there isn't quite as much architecture around players. So exactly. you sign a player, does he fit? Does he work? Give him 6 months. If he doesn't, he's got to go back, because we've got to move on, because the Premier League moves at such a quick speed. And even if you look at Atalanta, like another player that fascinates me is De Ketelaere, who everybody had heard of him before he left Belgium, goes to Milan, doesn't quite work, goes to Atalanta, finds a system which suits him slightly better, and all of a sudden he looks like the player he should do. In England, it doesn't feel as if you're given enough of a chance to kind of reinvent yourself. And I don't know whether people outside of England brand players as failures purely because of what they do in the Premier League, but it feels like outside, it's like it's like what being Chelsea head coach used to be, isn't it? It's like you failed out, but okay, don't worry about it. You can come and manage, another big side because it doesn't really mean anything.
But Seb, I think that there is an element of when an Italian or an an Italian or an Spanish or a German side make an investment, they have to make sure that it works for them.
Yeah.
Whereas in England, and let's see what happens after this summer when the new rules fall in place, maybe we start seeing that. But in Spain, if you buy a player for 30, 40 million, you put him in the starting lineup and you make sure that it works for you. I remember Newcastle signing Bruno Guimaraes 2.5 years ago. It took him a month or two to start for Newcastle. You wouldn't see that in another league. If you pay that money for a player, that price tag, that player is your star player from the beginning.
I wonder if it's a little bit about accountability too, because it's only in Germany, like if as a board member for sport or sporting director, you are attached to a big failure, you're not going to be there for much longer. In England, it's kind of you don't really get to fill out sort of the dimensions of your recruiting department. They're kind of Svengalis and gurus who never really come and sort of talk to television or radio or appear in the press. Whereas there's actual accountability, right? You kind of, right, well, you've made a decision, it's a bad one. This is going to have a political consequence, which for a lot of reasons, which is probably a new podcast, it's never really the same in England, is it?
Mm. All right, well, that one's nicely poised at 1-1. Leverkusen 2-0 up against Roma ahead of the second leg in Germany. You sort of minded, Seb, to say, well, as you try to make any kind of argument for anything other than a routine Leverkusen win, I thought, well, maybe Roma could take something from what Karabag did at Leverkusen earlier in the competition, but Karabag lost that game, so maybe not.
Yeah, and also over the weekend, obviously they played ever so well against Eintracht Frankfurt. Also, and this is a theme with Leverkusen, they relied on contributions from deep in their squad. Adam Herzog had a hat-trick of assists. Arthur, who the club, I'm not quite sure of the timeline, but the club certainly rate as being a potential successor to Jeremy Frimpong, as and when he leaves the club. They really, really like him as a fullback, even though he played out of position here. It's really hard to see Roma capitalising on fatigue, or just because that squad is so deep, or anything else really. I think it's over. I'm sure the internet will be gentle with me if that proves not to be the case, but I would fancy Leverkusen.
Roma, Alvaro, just got to get the first goal and see where it takes them. I guess that's their only hope.
Yeah, they really have to, and they can attack, and they've got the quality of Dybala, Lukaku up front. They can do it, but also Roma's run lately in the Serie A hasn't been as bright as it was when Daniele De Rossi was appointed. And on top of that, I really believe that there is a sense of a mission in Bayer Leverkusen players and Xabi Alonso as well. They really want to finish unbeaten. If you look at the way they are celebrating, the goals they are scoring in the aggregate time just to draw a game or to win it, they really want to finish unbeaten. It's a mission for them, and this makes a difference for this tie too. I think that they will definitely try to be unbeaten here.
We'll talk more of Leverkusen later. Jules, you give Roma any chance whatsoever here?
No, and I found them a bit tired already against Juventus on Sunday night in the big game in Serie A. And I just think there's no stopping this Bayer Leverkusen team, especially when you have got a 2-goal deficit already. I think if it was 0-0 after the first leg, you always have a chance. 2-0, you need to score 3 goals. You need to win 3-0 in Leverkusen to qualify. It's not happening.
All right, official. Conference League semis also going on this week. Olympiacos 4-2 up against Aston Villa after that crazy first leg at Villa Park. Jose Luis Mendilibar, Alvaro, looking to win a European trophy for the second season in a row.
I mean, who would have told Jose Luis Mendilibar when he was the manager of Eibar 5 years ago that he was gonna have the chance to lift back European trophies? It's incredible. He did it with Sevilla last season. He arrives in clubs and he brings back normality. This is the most important thing about Jose Luis Mendilibar. He doesn't ask for weird things to his players. He goes back to basics, which is a cliche, but it's true in the case of the man from Biscay. And the other day I was watching the game against Olympiacos, and some of the patterns of Eibar 2018 were reflected there, with El Cabi pressing up front with Podence in the same way that Quique Garcia and Sergi Enrich would have done back in La Liga 5 years ago. And, I think that Olympiacos is oozing. They believe that they can make it. The final is in Athens as well, and they'll be up for it, but Aston Villa has a chance. I think that the fact that the away goal rule was scrapped gives them a chance. Imagine that they have to win by 3-0 this game. They only have to score 2 and then see what happens. So I believe that they've got a chance, of course, but Olympiacos in the counter-attack can be deadly as well, as we saw the other day.
Whatever happens, Evangelos Marinakis will respond in a measured way, I'm sure, Seb. You do give Villa a chance, I mean, partly because of Unai Emery, partly because of Ollie Watkins, I guess. But if you saw their limp defeat at Brighton on Sunday, you'd say, this team looks pretty cooked, and they've got significant players who've been out injured for a long time. Is it just the Emery factor that's making us think that they can overturn this?
Yeah, I think so. But if you look at the quality in the squad, that would make an argument. But then I agree with you, they look knackered. And rightly so, because it's been a long season. They've competed in European football all the way through it. They're engaged in this kind of emotionally sapping bid for 4th place. I think most of all, I was worried by how jaded Ollie Watkins looked at the weekend, because he wasn't himself. He wasn't, he was way off the standard he set for himself across the season. And also, Matt, on the list of places I'd like to go to get a result in European football, Athens not high, really. So I think Olympiacos get through.
Is it me, or Olympiacos has been the behemoth of English sides for a few years now? Because they beat Arsenal right before the lockdown started. I remember that one.
Beat Spurs in the Champions League.
Spurs in the Champions League. They also did beat
Podence,
Burnley in the Europa League playoffs too.
Yes, they did.
They've done a few of these.
Yeah.
All right, well, they're basically Nottingham Forest B, so I'm counting this as a European semi-final for my team. What do you think, Jules? Do you give Villa a chance here? Another game where first goal's key?
Yeah, I think they have a chance. I'm slightly a bit more optimistic than the boys, maybe, because I think I can't see Olympiacos being able to defend that lead, and I can't see them being as efficient as they were at Villa Park either, because let's not forget that everything when they were, literally everything. Even Douglas Luiz penalty when there was. So I think Villa have a chance, but they would have to be better than Brighton. But how much in that Brighton game were they already thinking about Olympiacos though? Because I know in the league they're still playing. They were playing before the weekend with Spurs for that 4th place. They were still 7 points clear, and I do wonder if their mind was already a little bit in Piraeus and not so much in Brighton. So I've got faith in them. I think they can do it.
I don't really think that Olympiacos are Forest B, by the way. I'm just bitter about being part of a multi-club model. It'll come to your team too soon, listener, I'm sure. And the other semi-final is Club Brugge against Fiorentina. It's 3-2 to La Viola after the first leg in that one. That's the intercontinental action. We'll get back to domestic business next. In the Bundesliga, make that 48 games unbeaten in all competitions for Bayer Leverkusen, equaling the post-war record set by Benfica across all comps. The record is 61, set by Celtic in 1917, according to Gab Marcotti. Seb, I wonder if we can't truly appreciate what they've done now that we're in the eye of the storm. If it's one of those where we'll have to let the dust settle for a year or two and then look back at it. Because you kind of get snowblind to the W's and the D's in their column, right? And all the late goals, etc. We need some time to let it sink in and then appraise it, maybe.
Yeah, it's one of those that suits an athletic long read, Matt, isn't it? Because there are so many moments, particularly after the title was clinched, where you couldn't help but be impressed. We mentioned earlier the Dortmund game when they're 1 down in 96th minute, found an equaliser. That tension in their play has never left, even though they, beyond the unbeaten record, they have nothing to play for. And still, they went to Eintracht. Eintracht are a good side, full of talented players. Yeah, they're pretty unpredictable, and Dina Topmüller's first season has been a bit up and down, but battered them, absolutely smashed them. And they're able to chop and change the first team. They're able to put players into specific roles and get not just a developing performance, an immediate quality 8 out of 10 performance from whoever they put in the side. And one of the reasons I think this will be a kind of a great season, particularly in retrospect, is because Alonso's done such a good job in making sure that everyone remains focused, that nobody stops to celebrate Leverkusen before it's time, before all their interest in other competitions have ended. And so you get this kind of perpetual what next? How else are they going to impress us? Who's the guy that's going to turn up? So we talked about Adam Hojek at the weekend at the Waldstadion, and Nathan Teller's contribution, for instance. Stanisic is in there. Robert Andrich played as centre-back over the weekend. So every week you're talking about something different, to the point where you don't kind of take a step back and look at the entire picture and go, what body of work, right? Because they've got Bochum and Augsburg left in the Bundesliga. heavy favourites to win both of those games. I would back them to win the Europa League. They're playing Kaiserslautern in the DFB Pokal, who Kaiserslautern are kind of struggling in the Zweite Bundesliga this season. You back them to do that. So we're talking potentially about an undefeated treble-winning season. There's no way of spinning that as anything other than one of the great seasons in modern footballing history. It's impossible.
And for Xabi Alonso, one of the great managerial achievements if he manages to do all that.
Yeah, of all time. And I was thinking that, you know, maybe we can fall into the temptation of using numbers to describe everything that Xabi Alonso and Bayer Leverkusen have done. And I think you hinted that a little bit, because numbers have a certain solemnity, you know, they are univocal. So you say 48 games unbeaten, Xabi Alonso, second season in elite football, whatever. But it's more than the numbers. I mean, we have to start putting adjectives to this, and we have to start explaining the story very well. From the moment that Xabi Alonso took this team, and the way he's making play, footballers like, for example, Grimaldo, that they never expected, the Spanish guy, to have this much impact in a football game. Players like Frimpong, if he was slightly more clinical, Bayer Leverkusen would have scored 10 more goals this season because Frimpong gets many chances. And the way Granit Xhaka, for example, has been revamped into this kind of total midfielder, really. I mean, there are so many narratives in there. And for me, it's the story maybe of the last 5 years. Bayer Leverkusen, seriously. I think that I'm not exaggerating. Perspective will tell. But a side that has never won the Bundesliga, being able to win 3 trophies in a season is something unprecedented.
Yeah, I also think kind of now it's really easy to look back at it and say, hey, there was always greatness in these players. I don't really agree. Like, I think obviously Florian Wirtz has been heralded as a great coming force in German football for a long time, but Wirtz was not like guaranteed to reach the same level after his injury. Alvaro's already talked about Grimaldo, who, okay, nice free signing pickup, but not a title-changing player. Same with Jonas Hoffmann, who, German international, yes, but was at Gladbach and was fairly good player, unremarkable player. Xhaka at Arsenal. And then you add in guys like Andrich, who... Andrich, when he was at Union Berlin, he was kind of a destroyer, like a guy that you just put in position to just nullify stuff. Good player, but not the kind of Teutonic Lampard that he seems to have turned into. Everywhere you look, you see someone who has been developed or who has reached a level of potential that they were never thought to have had prior to Alonso joining the club. And even guys like Victor Boniface. So yes, top scorer in the Europa League last season, but Victor Boniface is someone who doesn't come with the assurance of being able to step into a top league, because he'd never played beyond Belgian football before. He'd been in Norway prior to that. Comes in, immediately successful, right? And that's kind of, it describes an ability of Alonso to make sure people know their roles. And something Jeremy Frimpong said, like I interviewed him and he said, when he talks to you, he's able just to clearly tell you what he wants, and people understand it, and people know what your role is within that team. And that's true everywhere. And when that's the case, you see like the absolute maximum that players are able to give in this side, and it's so impressive.
And they play, they do make plenty of passing triangles. I think the midfielders and the wingers at times, wingbacks, they seem to be together, very close to each other. But those passing triangles, rather than for defending themselves, they always end up with a pass forward. Yeah. That is something that catches my attention a lot. They did it against Roma a lot. You know, those passing triangles sometimes, on other sides, tend to finish them off with a pass backwards and starting the build-up again. Bayer Leverkusen is not about that. That suffocates the opponent a lot, because you know that every 4 or 5 passes, they're going to send the pass through.
I thought exactly the same thing against Roma, because I remember watching the first 20 minutes of that game and thinking, hey, Roma came to play. They've got loads of energy. And yet, like after about half an hour, you started noticing Leverkusen manufacturing 3-on-3, 4-on-4 out of nothing. Like they're inbuilt to kind of have... Verticality is not a phrase I like, but it is essentially that, isn't it? They're able to transition so quickly and clinically that they're able to play against the grain of what a game is at that particular time. It's so interesting to watch.
Give us another headline or two, Seb, from the Bundesliga this weekend. You had Stuttgart beating Bayern. You were saying before we started, slightly embarrassing for Bayern, given the links between the teams. You got the Hamburg derby, trouble at Union Berlin. Lots going on.
Well, I'll rattle through them. So yes, obviously Stuttgart were brilliant against Bayern Munich, and a little bit of a kick in the teeth for Bayern because, of course, Stuttgart are managed by Sebastian Hoeneß, who previously coached their second team, who play professional senior football, but at a much lower level. Angelo Stiller, right at the heart of that Stuttgart team. He's another former Bayern youth player who I suspect might find his way back there. Less fun are in Cologne, who look certain to be relegated now. Unfortunately, they weren't banned against Freiburg. They just don't quite have enough up front to kind of. They play pretty well, but they're just a little bit toothless, and they look like they're going down. Mainz rejuvenated under Bo Henriksen, who's done a wonderful job since coming in. They're actually unbeaten since conceding 8 in Munich about 6 weeks ago. But Henriksen's done a wonderful job in freeing a lot of players and getting them to kind of rage against the kind of spectre of relegation. So they have a hope of they're currently in the relegation playoff spot, but they might drag Union Berlin, who were 3-0 down at home to Bochum over the weekend. Eventually came back to 2-3, lost 4-2. One of the kind of the sort of unwelcome bits of symmetry from Union's perspective would be that they're actually the last Zweite Bundesliga club to come up via the relegation game, which is the playoff between the first and second division. They might be the next to go down by that mechanism. And also Hamburg Derby. So I live in Hamburg, so I'm going to tell you about this whether you like it or not. St. Pauli could have gone up in the Volkspark, which is the kind of thing that you never live down. Had a conversation with my HSV supporting brother-in-law who said, don't care that they go up so much, it just can't happen on our pitch. We sidestepped that landmine, but St. Pauli host Osnabrück, who Michael Cassons fans might want to know he's currently orchestrating their midfield. So once of Bayern Munich, almost of Leeds United, once of Venezia. He's now playing second division German football, but Osnabrück have already been relegated from the Zweite Bundesliga, so you'd back St. Pauli to win there, and they would fully deserve their promotion. They've been excellent, and it would be the first time in history that they've played in the Bundesliga era that they've played at a higher level than HSV. So that'll be a very strange Hamburg dynamic.
Wow. Away from the Bundesliga, PSV Eindhoven officially won the Eredivisie for the 25th time on Sunday. They beat Sparta Rotterdam 4-2. Goal difference up to plus 88. Played 32. Scored 107. Conceded 19. First major trophy of Peter Bosch's career. All right, we'll take a look.
Peter Bosch.
Are you pleased for him?
I just think some people are so quick to kind of to dismiss him as a bit of a zealot towards attacking football. That you kind of, and they've played brilliantly. They've been so much fun to watch. I know that I know what Peter Bosch's flaws are as a coach, and we've all seen those. But you know, his football is a spectacle, and goodness, a lot of those players under him have played well this season, so they deserve it.
Good on them. All right, we'll take a little break, then we'll come back and do Ligue 1 et La Liga. Only 7 games in Ligue 1 this weekend because they know how to look after their teams in European action. Will Still, follower of Julien Laurent on Instagram.
That's right, my friend.
He's left Reims for the media effect. Belgian-born English manager. He's only 31. They'd only won 2 of their last 14 games, but there will still be plenty of suitors for Will Still. Sunderland in particular will still be interested in Will Still. Where do you think he's going to go, Jules?
Again, he might will still be going to Sunderland, my friend. It's a really interesting one because, and we've seen it maybe a little bit with Brighton and De Zerbi, when your manager start being linked with a lot of other jobs, where even as a player, maybe you're wondering if he really wants still to be there with you as your boss in a way. And Will Still, first half of the season, really good. There was a point where we thought they could even get maybe top 6, top 7 and qualify for Europe, which for Reims would be amazing. And then he started talking, I don't want to blame the Athletic, but mostly to the Athletic, in an interview where he was very honest and I think very, very nice and kind to say that he would like to come back to England, maybe coach in the Champions League, maybe in the Premier League at some point. That was the dream, the objective, etc., which a lot of managers said. I don't think we can blame him for that. It's just that since that, the form hasn't been great. They had a shocking result last weekend, not this weekend, the one before, where he was really, really disappointed. I've rarely seen him that angry. And then I think it was probably the right thing to do. He can now focus on finding a club in England for next season, and the club and Reims have moved on and we'll find him a replacement. It was great while he lasted for him, because I think at 31 he showed already what a great potential he has. And I really think that sky is the limit because he's got that much talent.
Jules, you're the busiest man in showbiz, so you've got to get to your next commitment. Anything else we should know about in Ligue 1 before we let you go?
Yeah, we saw a big win for Monaco. That secured them Champions League football for next season, which is big. It's big for Adi Hutter, by the way, who at some point was a little bit under pressure. And I know he's one of Alvaro's favorite players, so we have to mention Wissam Ben Yedder, who has 33. He can't run anymore. He's not. I mean, he never really ran that much, but he still cannot run anymore, and he's still capable of bossing games like he did on Saturday with Minamino up front. A really, really good win for them. Fantastic. And we'll have a great fight for third and fourth place between Brest, who is James Richardson's favorite club as well, and Lille. Lille have a game in hand. And as you know as well, there was no game on Sunday in France because it was May the 5th, which is the sad anniversary of the Foriani tragedy back in 1992, where 18 Bastia fans lost their lives before the French Cup semi-final against Marseille, when one of the stands that they built temporarily to extend the ground collapsed before the game, also injuring over 2,000 fans. So it was a really sad moment, and since that day we never ever play on May the 5th, regardless of what day of the week it is. So yesterday was one for tribute, and we'll have a very nice Lyon against Lille tonight on Monday night as we record this to finish the weekend in Ligue 1.
Nice. Jules, grateful for your contributions as ever. Try and enjoy the game midweek.
Thank you, boys. I'll be thinking of you.
Let's get to La Liga then, Alvaro. Really only one story in town this weekend. Obviously, Real Madrid winning the league. The game that sealed the title for them didn't involve them, though. Girona qualifying for the Champions League with a 4-2 win against Barcelona, summing up a magnificent season for them. Some brilliant goals in this game as well.
Well, the goal from Porto is one of my favorites, really.
Van Basten-esque.
Totally. It was beautiful, really. But Porto must be, 170, which is 5.7, something like that. He's not a very tall guy. Van Basten was a colossus. But yeah, the goals were beautiful. And Girona this season has inflicted Barcelona an 8-4 aggregate. And these two sides have never been regional opponents. If anybody, Espanyol has been Barcelona's big opponent locally. But Girona is possibly going to finish the league ahead of Barcelona, which would be, number one, something marvelous for Girona, and number two, something probably catastrophic for Barcelona's finances, because they will miss out on the Super Cup if they don't finish in the top two. And the Super Cup gives you some money that Barcelona could do with, considering that they've got a big debt. But I think that Girona has been the story of the season in La Liga. This morning I heard I think it was Quique Cárcel, the sporting director, talking, and he was saying that he's very confident that for the next season, but the season of Girona is very remarkable in contrast with Barcelona's season. Xavi is going to stay after saying that he was going to leave, but who knows if he's going to stay, if Barcelona is so changeable and Barcelona's board changes their mind from one week to another. And Barcelona has conceded 4 goals against Paris, 4 goals twice against Girona. They have conceded 4 against Athletic Club Bilbao in the Cup, 5 against Villarreal. They are a side that last season they made from their clean sheets a fortitude, and they won La Liga like this. But last season I said many times that I thought that a small amount of goals conceded by Barcelona wasn't so much about how good defensively they were as a group, but about heroic performances from Araujo and about a very bad XG from their opponents in front of Barcelona's goal, Ter Stegen. And I think that this season we're seeing that. Barcelona last season, by defending so well or having so many good defensive numbers, they weren't laying the foundations to have a good defense this season. They weren't laying the foundations for that. And you can see it this season. They've been drained by conceding so many.
Anything else we should know about in La Liga?
Only one thing. This is not exactly or strictly about La Liga, but I think we have to mention César Luis Menotti. He passed away, the manager of Argentina in 1978, when Argentina won the World Cup, their maiden World Cup. El Flaco Menotti passed away on Sunday, and he was the manager of Barcelona, a big admirer of Barcelona, and a manager so influential for some others that he created a school of thought called Menotismo, which in Argentina and in the Latin world gets contrasted with Bilardismo. Bilardo being the manager of Argentina in the 86, when Argentina won it with Maradona, Menotti being the manager of Argentina in 78. Menotti advocates for beautiful football. Bilardo advocates for being as tricky as you can, defensive or even sometimes a little bit of a cheat to win games. Menotismo and Bilardismo has been what has spurred on the debate about how football should be played in Latin countries for easily 40 years now. So rest in peace, but Menotti was a proper legend of football.
The yin and yang of the Latin football world. What a lovely way to finish this edition of the Totally Football Show. Many thanks to Alvaro and to Seb for being here live and in living colour. Thanks to Jules for being on the big screen, James for dialing in from Spain, and to Charlie and Liam in the booth for putting it all together. But mainly to you, listener, for lending us your ears. Another Totally Show back with you on Thursday. Bye for now.
The Totally Football Show podcast is available 3 times a week, bringing you all the football news you could reasonably be expected to care about. We've got views, we've got stats, we've got analysis, we've got some of the best football writers around, and the whole thing is absolutely free. So have a listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or all the usual places by clicking on the link below.